The Jovian gas mining platform was a marvel of modern engineering, if by marvel you meant rusting death trap. Chief Engineer Thalassa had spent more time patching up its wheezing systems than she'd care to admit. It's like a relationship, she'd often quip, requires constant maintenance and you still get nothing out of it. Today, though, maintenance wasn't on the agenda. Anomalies were. Nasty, suspicious anomalies that refused to explain themselves, like a politician at a press conference. "We've got another one," Thalassa's second-in-command, Darvo, called over the comms. He had the kind of voice that would make a funeral director sound like a stand-up comedian, flat, tired, and just a bit too honest about what kind of day you were about to have. Gas flows acting like it's got stage fright. Again, Thalassa slouched into the cramped operations deck, ducking under a pipe that had been trying to kill her since she first stepped onto the platform. "All right, Darvo," she said, leaning over his terminal, "what's the verdict? We've got gas surges where there shouldn't be and nothing where there should, like the system's throwing a tantrum." "Great," she muttered. "I always wanted to work with moody machinery." She glanced at the readouts. Numbers danced like they were at an intergalactic rave, unpredictable, wild, and definitely too drunk to be of any use. Darvo rubbed his face with a grease-stained hand. "Maybe the platform's just trying to resign, and we should respect its decision." "If only it came with a severance package," Thalassa replied, punching up a diagnostic. "But no, we're stuck in this marriage from hell." She tapped a few buttons, the terminal beeping in protest. "Anything unusual in the gas composition? You mean besides the fact we're mining invisible jellyfish?" Darvo snorted, stabbing a finger at the screen. "We've got traces of something. Different. Define different." "Different as in not in the bloody manual," Darvo said. "And when's the last time anyone updated that thing anyway?" "Right around the time they decided safety regulations were optional," Thalassa said dryly. "Okay, let's see what's new in the universe of inexplicable phenomena." She squinted at the display, which only seemed to add a fresh layer of mystery to the already incomprehensible mess. "Whatever it is, it's not from around here." "Figures," Darvo said, swiveling in his chair to face her. "You think it's just cosmic junk floating by, or should we be worried about space ghosts? I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's no such thing as space ghosts. Just space bastards with an agenda." She sighed, adjusting her tool belt. "I guess it's time to suit up and go see this for ourselves." As they headed to the airlock, Thalassa grabbed her helmet, giving it a resigned look. "If I don't come back, tell my collection of bad decisions I loved them." "I'll throw them a party in your honor," Darvo replied with a deadpan that could have rivaled a black hole in terms of light absorption. Suiting up was like being shrink-wrapped in misery. The suits were old, reeking of sweat and desperation, but they kept the vacuum out and your insides in, so they were the best friends you'd ever have in this business. Thalassa sealed her helmet, her breath echoing in the confines like a constant reminder of how fragile humans really were. The airlock cycled with a groan that suggested it was deeply unhappy with its life choices, and they stepped into the void. The gas field stretched out below, an endless roiling mass of greens and purples, colors only visible because someone had slapped artistic filter onto reality. Thalassa drifted over to one of the outlying nodes, her maneuvering thrusters sputtering like an asthmatic trying to climb stairs. "Darvo," she said over the comms, "I'm at the primary node." "Looks like someone gave it a good kick. Think it's sabotage." Darvo's voice crackled back, laced with static and skepticism. "Sabotage or shoddy manufacturing. At this point, I don't know which is more likely." "Well, if it is sabotage, let's track down the bastard and give him a medal for trying." Thalassa snorted, deploying her toolkit and getting to work. She pulled up a series of maintenance logs, scanning through them with the kind of speed that comes from knowing the inevitable conclusion would make her want to punch something. "Looks like we've been getting these anomalies for weeks, but they've been getting worse." "You think it's got something to do with that weird signal we picked up last month?" Darvo asked. "The one we dismissed as cosmic noise." "Wouldn't be the first time the universe tried to prank call us." As she tinkered with the node, a low hum vibrated through her suit, At first, she thought it was just the usual background radiation, but it grew louder, more insistent, like a wasp in a tin can. "You hear that?" "Hear what?" "That humming," Thalassa said, her brow furrowing. "Like someone's trying to tune into a cosmic radio station. Maybe it's the universe finally trying to tell us to bugger off. Wouldn't that be a relief?" she murmured, focusing on the task at hand. But the hum refused to be ignored, worming its way into her thoughts with a persistence that suggested it was more than just a malfunction. Just then, her visor display flickered. Text scrolled across the screen, indecipherable at first, then coalescing into something she could almost understand. "Darvo, you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "Something's broadcasting," Thalassa said, a shiver crawling up her spine. "And it's not friendly." The text continued to march across her visor, demanding worship, allegiance, and a healthy dose of fear. "Oh great," she muttered, "we've stumbled onto a religious fanatic. Alien evangelists." "Seems that way," Thalassa said, her voice tight with a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Looks like we've got ourselves a first contact scenario." Darvo's laughter crackled over the comms. "First contact. I always imagined it with more parades and fewer threats of divine retribution." "You and me both," she replied. "But it seems the universe doesn't share our taste in diplomacy." The message was relentless, cycling through plea and threat, as if the aliens couldn't decide if they were selling salvation or hellfire. "Well," Thalassa sighed, "at least we're not bored anymore." Darvo sighed in response, the kind of sigh that said we're all screwed, but in a much more resigned and articulate way. "So what's the plan, Chief?" "Plan," Thalassa said, securing the node and double-checking her seals. "I guess we do what we always do. Ignore the problem until it goes away." "Exactly," she said, pushing off from the node and starting back to the platform. "We'll report it, try not to get killed, and if we're lucky, maybe someone will believe us before we're all vaporized by an ancient god with a god complex." "Sounds like a solid plan," Darvo replied, voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's the only one I've got." Thalassa touched down on the platform, her boots clanging against the metal with a sound that was reassuringly solid in a world suddenly full of intangibles. "Let's get back inside and figure out how to explain this mess to command." "Explain," Darvo said, cycling through the airlock after her. "I was just gonna send them a recording and a bottle of whiskey." "Whiskey might be more effective," Thalassa admitted, removing her helmet. The stale air of the platform was a welcome relief, despite its aroma of grease and overcooked despair. The platform's command center was a patchwork of screens, each one displaying its own brand of chaos. Thalassa tapped a few controls, pulling up the recording of the transmission. "All right," she said, settling into her chair. "Let's see what kind of ancient alien nonsense we're dealing with." Darvo leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. "You think they are serious about the whole worship thing? Serious enough to broadcast it," Thalassa said. "And in my experience, anything willing to scream across the cosmos usually means business." "Great," Darvo said, deadpan as ever. "Just what I needed. Another entity threatening my existential crisis." Thalassa snorted. "Welcome to the club." Membership perks include endless terror and the occasional existential dread. They sat in silence for a moment, staring at the looping message. It was almost mesmerizing in its persistence, a reminder that the universe had a sick sense of humor. "We need a plan," Thalassa finally said, breaking the spell. "Something better than hope they get bored. Maybe we could bribe them with some of the mining output," Darvo suggested, half joking. "If ancient aliens wanted hydrogen, I'm pretty sure they'd just take it," Thalassa replied. "No, we need to figure out what they really want." "We're assuming they're rational," Darvo pointed out. "For all we know, we're dealing with cosmic toddlers throwing a tantrum." "Let's hope not," Thalassa said, pulling up the platform's inventory. "Otherwise, we're going to need a really big timeout corner." As they combed through the data, the platform's lights flickered. Thalassa looked up, frowning. "Please tell me that's just another anomaly. Or a sign that our new friends are losing patience," Darvo offered. "If they want to start a fight," Thalassa muttered, They're going to find out just how stubborn humans can be. The lights flickered again, a disconcerting pattern that suggested something more than mere mechanical failure. "Looks like we've got a long night ahead," Thalassa said, cracking her knuckles. "And here I thought working in space would be boring," Darvo replied, settling in next to her. "Guess we were wrong." As the platform shuddered under the weight of the unknown, Thalassa couldn't help but smile grimly. "We may be outmatched," she said, "but we're definitely not out of ideas." "And what ideas are those, Chief?" Darvo asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "The usual," Thalassa said. "Make it up as we go along and hope for the best." The universe, with its unending vastness and occasional tendency to fling cosmic absurdity at unsuspecting humans, had yet again decided to test its favorite species in the most inconvenient manner possible. Thalassa, who'd once thought that space would be glamorous, had long ago learned that space was mostly tedium punctuated by existential dread. She watched the lights flicker on the panel before her, giving it a look of pure loathing. "Looks like the ancient aliens are having another go at redecorating," Thalassa muttered, flicking switches and tapping buttons with well-practiced annoyance. "Maybe they think the lights look better this way," Darvo suggested, his voice tired and dry as an asteroid belt. "Or maybe they're just bored. Well, they are in for disappointment." "We're fresh out of things worth taking," Thalassa said, staring at the screen displaying the relentless flood of gibberish text. "Except maybe our patience, and that's in short supply too." On cue, another panel sparked with the enthusiasm of a teenager forced to attend a family reunion. It fizzled out with a deflated hiss, leaving behind the pervasive smell of burning circuitry. Thalassa sighed. "And there goes panel 6. Again, Darvo, seated nearby with his eternal expression of someone who'd seen it all and found it equally unimpressive, leaned back in his chair. "You think they'll ever get bored and go pick on someone else? Maybe some other poor bastards are sitting around wondering why their space microwave is trying to convert them to some alien religion. Knowing our luck." "Probably not," Thalassa replied, reaching for the toolkit that had become a permanent fixture by her side. "I suppose we'll just have to keep putting out fires until either they get bored or we run out of things to break." Thalassa stood, pausing to give a mock salute to the malfunctioning panel. "Right, let's go make sure we've got enough duct tape to hold this tin can together." The corridors of their platform, a labyrinth of metal and neglect, echoed with the sound of their footsteps. A place so familiar, Thalassa could have navigated it blindfolded. Which was good, because the lights continued their merry dance between on and off, plunging them into periodic darkness. "You know," Thalassa said, her voice bouncing off the walls, "there's a certain charm to working in these conditions. It's like working in a haunted house but with more chances of explosive decompression." "Charming," Darvo said, his tone as flat as the platform's budget. "Do you ever think about relocating?" "Sure," Thalassa said. "Problem is, everywhere else is just as likely to have homicidal aliens. At least here I know which panels are going to explode." They arrived at the maintenance hub. A messy, overcrowded room with just enough workspace to suggest it was designed by someone who'd never actually worked a day in their life. Thalassa plunked down her toolkit and got to work on the panel. "We should really start naming all the things that go wrong," she said, unscrewing a panel cover. "You know, like hurricanes. This one could be Dave the dysfunctional display." "I'd vote for pain in my ass," Darvo suggested. "Not quite alliterative enough," Thalassa said, trying to ignore the faint hum that had been resonating through the platform. "But it's a contender." As she worked, the humming seemed to develop a rhythm, almost musical. It wasn't exactly Beethoven, more like a tone-deaf orchestra tuning up. "Hear that?" she asked, glancing over at Darvo. He cocked his head, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Yeah, like a swarm of bees got into the sound system, or maybe a chorus of alien monks." "Perfect," Thalassa said dryly. "Just what we need, a cult of space bees to add to our problems." Despite her sarcasm, there was something unsettling about the noise. It wasn't just sound, it was intent. An insistence that refused to be ignored. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, tightening wires and replacing blown circuits. "So what's our plan if these otherworldly choir boys decide to get nasty?" Darvo asked, leaning against the wall with the ease of someone who'd mastered the art of waiting. "Plan," Thalassa repeated, her screwdriver pausing mid-turn. "You mean besides praying to the nearest black hole for a swift end?" "That was the one," Darvo said, his mouth twitching into what might have been a smile if he'd been bothered to put in the effort. "I'm open to suggestions if you've got any," Thalassa said, returning to her work. "Though I have a feeling command's going to be less than helpful." "Command's never helpful," Darvo said, matter-of-factly. "They're too busy pretending we don't exist until they need to cut our funding." "Which is all the time," Thalassa grumbled. She finished her repairs, closing the panel with a finality that suggested any further issues would be met with a liberal application of force. "All right," she said, standing and stretching to ease the kinks in her neck. "Let's see if that calmed things down or just pissed them off more." They made their way back to the command center, half expecting to find it in flames or, at the very least, sparking with indignant fury. Instead, they were greeted by silence. Eerie, oppressive silence. "Did we fix it or did they finally give up?" Darvo asked, peering at the screens. "Could be either," Thalassa said, eyeing the readouts with suspicion. "Or maybe they're planning a surprise party." "Great," Darvo said. "I didn't bring a gift." Thalassa tapped a few keys, scrolling through the diagnostics. "Looks like the system's stable for now, but I don't trust it." "Smart," Darvo said, settling into his chair with a practiced ease. "I wouldn't trust anything designed by the lowest bidder either." Thalassa smirked, her fingers flying across the controls as she keyed in a report to command. As she did, the platform shuddered, a brief but violent tremor that sent a fresh wave of curses rippling through her mind. "And there's the punchline," she muttered, gripping the edge of the console as the tremor subsided. "Just when you thought it was safe to relax," Darvo said, his voice a monument to deadpan delivery. "All right," Thalassa said, pushing herself up. "Let's see what fresh hell awaits us this time." They moved as one, a long-practiced dance between crisis and calm as they checked system after system. It was a game of cosmic whack-a-mole, and the universe had all the best mallets. As they worked, the screens began to flicker again, the alien text flashing briefly before disappearing. "There it is," Thalassa said, pointing at the screen. "Our uninvited guests making another appearance." "Persistent, aren't they?" Darvo said, glancing over her shoulder. "Like a bad rash," Thalassa replied. "We need to figure out how to block their signal, or at least turn it down," Darvo suggested. "This hum is getting on my nerves." Thalassa nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. "All right, let's try rerouting the communications array, see if we can scramble their frequency." They set to work, fingers flying across control panels, eyes scanning for any sign of reprieve from their spectral visitors. It was tedious and technical, but compared to impending annihilation, it was almost relaxing. "Ever get the feeling," Darvo said, his voice filling the silence with its usual brand of understated irony, "that the universe is just one big joke at our expense?" "All the time," Thalassa replied, adjusting settings with the fervor of someone who had nothing left to lose. "The punchline just keeps changing. And we never get to laugh," Darvo said. "Story of my life," Thalassa said, flashing him a wry grin. Their adjustments seemed to have some effect. At least the panels stopped flickering like a disco on stimulants. The hum, too, faded to a more tolerable level, though still present enough to remind them of the ever-watchful eyes, or whatever these entities used to perceive their victims. "Well," Thalassa said, stepping back to admire their handiwork, "that should hold them off for a while. Long enough for another cup of coffee at least," Darvo said, stretching his arms above his head. As they settled back into their seats, Thalassa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You know, if this keeps up, we're going to need hazard pay. Or a therapist," Darvo said dryly. "Same thing," Thalassa said. "At least now we've got a bit of breathing room to figure out what these aliens really want." "Let's hope it's not us," Darvo replied. "Amen to that," Thalassa said, leaning back and closing her eyes for a moment. In the silence that followed, the platform creaked and groaned, the sounds of a structure that had seen better days. It was a comforting sound, one that spoke of familiarity, of home. But it was a comfort tempered by the knowledge that somewhere out there, something was watching and waiting. And as Thalassa opened her eyes to the glow of the screens, she couldn't help but wonder if they'd be ready when the time came to face it. But for now, all they could do was patch things up and hope the universe's sense of humor wouldn't leave them stranded in the punchline. Thalassa drummed her fingers against the battered console, her eyes locked on the screens that were now behaving like the bastard offspring of a Christmas tree and a hangover. "All right, let's see if we can coax this heap of metal into giving us something useful," she muttered. Darvo glanced up from his seat, where he'd been examining his fingernails with the intensity of a man who had run out of ways to pretend he was busy. "And by something useful, you mean a reason to evacuate this floating coffin?" "Exactly," Thalassa replied. "But only after we've filed the appropriate paperwork, because nothing says job security like bureaucracy." The platform gave a groan so deep and soulful it could have sung bass in a choir. It set the scene rather nicely, Thalassa thought, for the arrival of the alien probe that had just appeared on her radar, drifting in with all the menace of a particularly persistent spam email. Darvo," she said, squinting at the screen. "We might have company." "Company?" Darvo echoed, his voice tinged with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. "Please tell me it's not another game of Spot the Homicidal Space Anomaly." "You wish," Thalassa said, tapping the screen where a small, flickering dot was making itself at home far too close for comfort. "Looks like an alien probe." Darvo leaned forward, rubbing his temples as if he could ward off the headache that was no doubt brewing. "Great. Maybe it's here to tell us we've won an intergalactic prize. With our luck, probably a one-way trip to oblivion." The probe hung in the void like a harbinger of bad news, sleek and dark, with an air of disdainful superiority. It was the kind of machine that looked like it was plotting to take over the universe, or at least ruin your day. "Think it's one of theirs?" Darvo asked, as they both stared at the visual feed. "Unless we're operating under the assumption that it's just a really advanced weather balloon." Thalassa punched a few more buttons, trying to get a read on the probe's intentions. All she got in return was static, and the growing sensation that the probe was watching them with an intensity that suggested it was about to ask them to bow down or face annihilation. For a few moments, the room was silent except for the occasional beep from the console, and then the probe decided it was time to make its move. The screens flashed alien symbols cascading across their surfaces like a digital waterfall of doom. Lights flickered, and the hum, a persistent, maddening drone, returned with a vengeance, seeping into Thalassa's skull like a bad song that refused to leave. "Darvo," she said, her voice tense, "I think it's trying to talk to us." "Wonderful. Let's hope it speaks piss off." Instead, the probe's attempt at communication took on a more insidious form. The hum grew louder, wrapping around Thalassa's mind like a vice. Thoughts twisted, warped, as if her brain were being rearranged one synapse at a time. "Get a grip," she told herself, slamming a mental door on the intrusion. But it wasn't easy. Her vision blurred, replaced by alien landscapes, flickering images of worlds unknown. And beneath it all, a whisper, seductive and dangerous. "Comply, comply, comply." Thalassa shook her head, the simple act feeling like wading through tar. She caught sight of Darvo, his eyes wide, mouth set in a grim line as he fought his own battle against the invasive thoughts. "Thalassa," he said, his voice strained but unwavering, "tell me we're not about to become part of some cosmic hive mind." "Not on my watch," she grunted, forcing herself to focus. "We need to shut this thing out, now." Together, they fumbled for the controls, fingers moving with desperate urgency. It was a race against time, against the creeping domination of the alien consciousness that sought to engulf them. "Jam the signal," Thalassa gasped, slamming her palm against the comms array. "If we can break the connection, maybe we can get our brains back." Darvo nodded, his movements jerky but determined as he worked the controls. A moment later, the platform shuddered again, the lights dimming as they rerouted power in a desperate attempt to block the probe's influence. The hum shifted, a discordant note in the symphony of chaos. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the alien probe's hold on them faltered, the images fading, the whispers receding to the edges of their minds. Thalassa sagged back in her chair, breathless and shaking with the effort of resisting. Beside her, Darvo was equally pale, his eyes ringed with exhaustion but filled with an unyielding fire. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice rough. "For now," Thalassa said, wiping a hand across her brow. "But that was too close. Whatever that thing's doing, it's got more tricks up its sleeve than a magician on speed." Darvo let out a long breath, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his armrest. "We need a plan, because I don't fancy living the rest of my life with an alien in my head." Thalassa nodded, her mind racing through possibilities. "We need to figure out how to block its signal permanently. Maybe if we can recalibrate the array, we can create some sort of protective barrier." "Sounds like a start," Darvo said, pushing himself upright with renewed determination. "But if we're going to play defense, let's make it count." Together, they set to work, the hum of the platform a comforting backdrop to their fevered activity. Thalassa's toolkit was a mess of wires and hope, but she wielded it with the precision of a surgeon and the creativity of a mad scientist. As they tinkered, Thalassa couldn't help but wonder what the probe's masters wanted. Was it just idle curiosity, or were they planning something more sinister? A prelude to invasion, or just another cosmic game? "Whatever it is," she muttered, tightening a bolt with more force than strictly necessary, "they picked the wrong humans to mess with." Darvo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Damn right. We're not the type to roll over and play nice." The hours ticked by, the work painstaking and exhaustive. They coded, recalibrated, and occasionally swore at uncooperative circuits. But finally, the array was ready, a network of hastily assembled defenses designed to keep their minds their own. "Will it work?" Darvo asked, eyeing the setup with the skepticism of a man who knew just how often the universe liked to prove him wrong. "Only one way to find out," Thalassa said, her tone a mix of defiance and weariness. She flipped the switch, and the platform thrummed with energy, a faint shimmer in the air as the barrier sprang into existence. They held their breath, waiting for the probe to make its move. But instead of the familiar assault on their senses, there was nothing. Just silence and the steady pulse of their own heartbeats. "Seems like it's working," Darvo said, cautiously optimistic. "Let's not jinx it," Thalassa replied, though she couldn't deny the small spark of hope flaring to life within her. With the immediate threat thwarted, they could finally take a moment to breathe. Thalassa turned to Darvo, a grin playing at the corners of her mouth. "So, about that cup of coffee," Darvo chuckled, shaking his head. "You and your priorities." "But sure, let's see if we can coax the machine into giving us something that passes for caffeine." They rose, a little unsteady but buoyed by their small victory. As they moved towards the galley, the platform's lights flickered in what Thalassa liked to think of as a begrudging acknowledgement of their success. "Do you think they'll come back?" Darvo asked as they waited for the coffee maker to sputter to life. "Probably," Thalassa said, her tone matter-of-fact. "But we'll be ready, and next time maybe we'll give them something to really think about." "You mean aside from the fact that we're not as easy to assimilate as they might like?" "Exactly," Thalassa replied, her grin widening. "Let's teach them a little something about human stubbornness." The coffee maker gurgled, and soon they were each cradling a mug of the dark, bitter liquid that passed for coffee on the platform. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind them that they were still here, still fighting. "Here's to us," Darvo said, raising his mug in a mock toast. "To us," Thalassa agreed, clinking her mug against his. "And to the fact that we're still the most unpredictable variable in this corner of the universe." And with that, they sipped their coffee, the heat and bitterness a welcome reminder that, for now, they were still very much in control of their own destinies. The platform groaned like it was auditioning for the role of creaky haunted space station in a horror flick. Thalassa wasn't sure if that was a good sign, or just the universe's way of letting them know it was about to up the stakes. "Just what we needed," she muttered, smacking the console with the kind of passion usually reserved for malfunctioning vending machines. An alien probe in existential crisis mode. Darvo glanced up from the mess of circuitry and wires scattered like entrails across the control room floor. What's it doing now? Performing a cosmic Shakespearean monologue seems more like it's trying to stage its own one-act play called Let's Screw with the Humans, Thalassa replied, wishing she could kick the console into submission. But knowing her luck, she'd just break a toe. The probe, still sulking beyond the platform's boundary, had decided that passivity was overrated. Lights flickered across its sleek surface like a disco ball with a superiority complex. Thalassa half expected it to start blasting music next. "Any bright ideas?" Darvo asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "Yeah, we run like hell, but since that's not an option, we go with Plan B." Thalassa tapped a few keys, coaxing the terminal to show something other than static. "And Plan B is?" Darvo prompted, the skepticism practically dripping from his words. "Improvise until something explodes," Darvo snorted. "I like how you think." The alien probe seemed to hear them, probably did, the way its tech was insinuating itself into their systems like a nosy neighbor with way too much time on their hands. It started broadcasting again, a pulsating signal that made the lights dance and flicker like a rave for the criminally insane. "Damn, it's persistent. Almost admire the dedication," Thalassa said, adjusting her toolkit like a gunslinger. "Let's see if we can mess with its frequency, messing with alien tech." What could possibly go wrong? Darvo muttered as he joined her, fiddling with the controls in a way that suggested he had a death wish or, at least, a really good insurance policy. They tinkered and adjusted, making the kind of educated guesses that usually ended in spectacular failures. The probe's signal grew more insistent, the mad hum filling the air like an invisible fog. "It's like being stuck in a bad dream," Thalassa said, biting her lip as she focused. "One where the alarm clock doesn't even have the decency to wake you up." The platform shuddered again, a deep, ominous rumble that spoke of imminent disaster. It was like they were trapped inside a giant whose stomach was about to rebel against last night's cosmic curry. "Maybe we should just invite the probe in for a cup of coffee," Darvo suggested, only half joking. "Give it a tour, show it we're not worth the trouble, right, because that's worked so well with every other alien species that's come our way," Thalassa shot back, rolling her eyes. "No, we need to jam it up good. Make it think twice before messing with us again." She reached for a particularly stubborn coil, fingers dancing across the keyboard with an engineer's desperation. The console lit up in response, numbers cascading down the screen like a binary waterfall of doom. "Think you got something?" Darvo asked, his voice tinged with hope he'd never admit to. "Maybe," Thalassa replied, though her tone suggested she was bracing for disappointment. "We need to redirect the signal, make it bounce back like a bad check." Darvo nodded, his eyes narrowing as he considered the idea. "Reflect it right back at them. I like it. It's about time we played hardball." With newfound determination, they set to work, fingers flying across controls with an urgency that bordered on frantic. The probe's signal was relentless, but so were they. "Take that, you overgrown toaster with delusions of grandeur," Thalassa muttered, a triumphant grin spreading across her face as the console beeped in a way that suggested they might actually be onto something. The platform shuddered again, but this time the sound was different, a low thrum of anticipation rather than impending doom. Darvo raised an eyebrow, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Did it work?" "Only one way to find out," Thalassa said, her voice both hopeful and wary. She flipped a final switch, and the tremor in the air shifted, the alien signal faltering like a bad radio station finally getting cut off. For a moment, silence reigned, the kind of silence that made you wish you hadn't forgotten how to breathe. Thalassa held her breath, waiting for the inevitable retaliation. But instead, there was nothing. Just the steady pulse of the platform's systems settling into a comfortable hum, as if they were acknowledging a small victory. "Hey, we might just be onto something here," Darvo said, the words barely out before the console erupted in a cascade of lights and warnings. Thalassa swore, the momentary relief evaporating like water on a hot stove. Spoke too soon. The probe was back, and it wasn't happy. The lights on its surface flickered faster, an angry strobe that suggested it was throwing a cosmic tantrum of epic proportions. "Looks like it's time for Plan C," Thalassa said, her mind racing through options that all ended with them fried. "Plan C?" Darvo echoed, his face a mask of resigned curiosity. "Yeah, Plan C. Don't die horribly. I like that plan," Darvo said, surprisingly upbeat for a man facing what was likely certain death or worse. "What's our next move?" Thalassa paused, surveying the tangled mess of wires and data streams before her. "We scramble its signal, then punch a hole in its defenses. Make it think twice about coming back here. Scramble and punch." "A classic 1-2, Darvo said, his tone darkly amused. "Guess it's time to show them what humans do best." With renewed vigor, they set to work again. Thalassa's hands moved with practiced precision, weaving a digital web designed to confuse and delay, while Darvo adjusted the platform's core systems to maximize the energy output. "Here goes nothing," Thalassa murmured, sending the final command through. The platform responded with a surge of power, the air crackling with energy as they launched their counterattack. The probe's lights danced erratically, shifting from a dismissive flicker to a panicked stutter. Thalassa watched, her breath caught in her throat as the probe writhed, its threatening hum turning into a defeated whimper. "Did we get it?" Darvo asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and cautious optimism. Thalassa leaned back, the tension in her shoulders easing as the console settled into a stable rhythm. "Looks like we did. At least for now." Together they watched as the probe's presence diminished, its sleek form retreating into the depths of space. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Damn," Darvo said, a wide grin breaking his usually dire expression. "We actually pulled it off." "Yeah," Thalassa agreed, her relief tempered by the knowledge that the probe's masters were still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. For now. The platform groaned again, but this time it was a sound of contentment, like an old beast finally allowed to rest. The lights settled into a steady glow, the hum of the systems a comforting reminder that they were still in control. "Think they'll be back?" Darvo asked, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Definitely," Thalassa replied, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. "But next time we'll be ready. We won't let them catch us off guard again." Darvo nodded, his face set with determination. "Then let's make sure this place is a fortress they'll regret ever messing with." Together, they set to work once more, bolstering the platform's defenses with the kind of human ingenuity that had kept their species alive despite the odds. As they toiled, Thalassa couldn't help but smile, a grim, defiant smile that spoke of resilience and stubbornness in the face of cosmic indifference. "Here's to us," she said, raising an imaginary glass in a mocking toast to themselves. "To us," Darvo echoed, his voice laced with an irreverent pride. "And to the fact that we're not going down without a fight." The platform hummed in agreement, a silent testament to their resolve. And as they worked, the stars watched, ancient and indifferent, waiting to see what the humans would do next. The lights on the platform flickered with the kind of desperation normally reserved for a drowning man flailing for a lifeline. Thalassa stared at the terminal, its screen now a kaleidoscope of error messages. The probe's retreat had been a temporary mirage, and the platform was showing all the symptoms of a system-wide meltdown. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Darvo quipped, pulling a wire here and smacking a panel there, like a mechanic with a grudge against old machinery. "Yeah, Right after I stick a fork in my eye, Thalassa snapped back, though the humor in her voice was genuine. The situation was dire, but cracking jokes at the abyss felt better than screaming into it. Any more bright ideas, genius? Maybe we should ask the alien probe for tech support. Press 1 for annihilation, press 2 for enslavement, Darvo replied, shaking his head as he began rerouting power to the essential systems. The hum of the platform was now a jittery whine, like an old man complaining about his knees. The control room was a symphony of alarms, each note more shrill and demanding than the last. The probe wasn't content to just lurk. It was throwing a cosmic hissy fit, battering them with signal after signal. The platform systems were crumbling under the assault, and Thalassa could feel the tension among the crew escalating like a pressure cooker with a broken release valve. God admit Thalassa. It was Koval, one of the other engineers, storming into the control room with the grace of a freight train. His expression was a cocktail of anger and desperation. Can't you see this is pointless? The probe's just gonna keep coming back until we're nothing but space dust. Thalassa suppressed a sigh. The platform was falling apart, and now it seemed the crew's unity was next. Koval, we've held them off once. We can do it again, she said, trying to inject confidence into her voice, though it felt like trying to fill a black hole with optimism. Held them off. Koval laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Thalassa, we're one system failure away from being sucked into Jupiter's loving embrace. Maybe it's time we considered their offer. The room went silent, the kind of silence where you could hear your own heartbeat trying to stage a solo. Offer? Darvo raised an eyebrow, turning his attention from the tangled wires to the simmering confrontation. Did I miss the part where they promised us cookies and milk? Yeah, the kind where you get a nice cell with bars and a view of your impending doom. Thalassa shot back, her patience wearing thinner than the station's hull. Koval wasn't backing down. At least they'd let us live. We're not heroes, Thalassa. We're just trying to survive. Survive. Thalassa felt the word like a slap. What's surviving if you've got nothing left worth living for? The control room was as tense as a piano wire ready to snap. Darvo stood by, arms folded, his eyes watching the exchange like a spectator at a particularly grim tennis match. Look, I get it, Thalassa continued, her voice softening. We're all scared, but surrendering, that's not survival. That's giving up everything that makes us human. Yeah, Darvo interjected, his tone laced with bitterness. The aliens don't want us dead. They want us compliant. Two very different flavors of defeat, my friend. Easy to say when you're not the one staring at the end, Koval muttered, the fight leaving his voice, replaced by the kind of weary resignation you'd expect from a guy who'd just lost his last dime at a casino. Thalassa stepped closer, her expression softening. Koval, you know what happens if we don't fight. We lose everything. Our freedom, our future, our ability to make terrible life choices. And I, for one, am very attached to my terrible life choices. That earned a chuckle from someone in the back, small, but enough to thaw the tension a notch. Listen, she went on, addressing the room, we've been through worse. We've made it this far not because we're lucky, but because we're stubborn. Humans don't roll over for anyone, let alone some intergalactic glorified blender. And if it's our time to kick the cosmic bucket. Another voice piped up, one of the technicians who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then we do it with style, Thalassa said, grinning. I mean, who else can say they pissed off a probe with a superiority complex that got a real laugh, scattered and subdued, but there. The kind of laugh you'd expect from people who'd given fate the finger more times than they could count. Darvo took a step forward, nodding. And besides, it's not like we've got anything better to do. Might as well make the universe work for our souls. There was a murmur of agreement, a sense of camaraderie rekindling among the crew. Thalassa felt it, a spark of defiance against the dark, a collective middle finger raised to the vast, indifferent cosmos. Koval sighed, the fight drained out of him. All right, you win. I'll grab my kit and see what I can do. But if we die, I'm haunting you first, Thalassa. Wouldn't have it any other way, she replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Now let's get to work before the probe decides to throw another temper tantrum. The crew dispersed, each returning to their stations with a renewed, if grim, determination. Thalassa turned back to the terminal, reassured that, at least for now, they were all committed to seeing this through. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" Darvo asked, joining her at the console. "Keep the systems running, keep the probe at bay, and find a way to punch them right in their smug alien faces," Thalassa said, typing commands with renewed intensity. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll live to tell the tale." "Sounds like a plan," Darvo nodded, his fingers dancing over the controls. "And if it doesn't work, at least we'll have some killer last words." "Yeah, something like, 'Oops, should have gone with Plan D,'" Thalassa replied, smirking. "Plan D?" Darvo asked, intrigued. "Die heroically," she answered, a wry smile playing on her lips. The platform shuddered again, a familiar groan echoing through the corridors. But this time it felt different. Not the ominous rumble of impending demise, but the determined growl of a beast ready to rise against its chains. They worked in sync, a pair of battle-worn mechanics holding together a ship that should have fallen apart long ago. The control room was a mess of wires and sparks, but amidst the chaos, there was a strange sort of order, an understanding that they were all in this together. As the hours stretched on, Thalassa found herself thinking about the alien probe. What did it want, really? To conquer? To enslave? Or was it just bored like some cosmic cat toying with them for amusement? "Ever wonder if this is all some divine comedy?" Darvo mused, breaking the silence. "Like we're the stars of an alien sitcom. Wish I could say it's funny," Thalassa replied, her eyes focused on the screen. "But if this is a comedy, I'm definitely not getting paid enough for my role." "Hey, at least we're the main characters," Darvo pointed out, grinning. "Think of all those extras who didn't even get a speaking line." "Yeah, and they probably got vaporized in the pilot episode," Thalassa said, chuckling despite herself. "True," Darvo conceded, a wry smile on his face. "Guess that makes us the lucky ones." "Lucky," Thalassa repeated, the word rolling around her mouth like a bad taste. But maybe he was right. Maybe luck wasn't about winning every battle, but about having the guts to keep fighting no matter how stacked the odds. And so they fought, a ragtag crew against an ancient menace. Hope was a tenuous thread, stretched thin but unbroken, glimmering in the darkness like a distant star. "Hey Thalassa, when this is over, think we'll get medals?" Darvo asked, his tone half joking, half hopeful. "Sure," Thalassa replied, grinning. "Shiny ones that say, 'Congratulations, you didn't die.' That's all I ever wanted," Darvo said, laughing as he continued to work. A nice shiny didn't die medal to hang on the wall. The platform shuddered one more time, but this time it was different. Not a prelude to disaster, but a sign of resilience, a testament to the stubborn defiance of humans who refuse to go quietly into the cosmic night. And as the stars watched, indifferent yet ever-present, Thalassa and her crew prepared to face whatever came next. Armed with nothing but grit and a healthy dose of irreverence, they stood ready to defy the odds once more. After all, if this was a cosmic joke, they were determined to have the last laugh. The platform groaned like an old man getting out of bed, which seemed appropriate given its current state. Thalassa squinted at the terminal, where the error messages scrolled by like a ticker tape of doom. Each one was a reminder that the alien probe had all the subtlety of a brick through a window. "Is it just me, or is the probe getting more personal?" Darvo asked, his head buried in the guts of a console. "I swear I caught it calling us names in binary. I'd be insulted if I didn't already have thicker skin than this rust bucket," Thalassa replied, tapping a finger against the flickering screen. "But look at this. The energy signature is fluctuating again." Darvo looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek. "Great, it's got mood swings now." "What's next?" "Passive-aggressive post-its." "Maybe," Thalassa mused, "but I think there's more to it. The fluctuations aren't random, they're almost like a pattern, a pattern." Darvo's eyebrows shot up. "Please tell me it's not the 'we're all going to die' pattern." "Not unless dying involves synchronized dance moves," Thalassa said, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Look, if we can figure out the rhythm of these signals, maybe we can disrupt them. Oh, I get it, Darvo said, snapping his fingers. We're gonna DJ the alien probe to death. Finally, something I'm qualified for. More like we're gonna throw a wrench in their symphony, Thalassa said, her mind racing. The probe's broadcasting on a specific frequency. If we can amplify a counter signal, we could give it a cosmic headache, Darvo finished, nodding. Guess it's time to make some noise. Koval appeared at the doorway, looking like he'd been dragged through a black hole backwards. You two plotting how to annoy the probe to death, pretty much, Thalassa said, shrugging. It's not like we have a better plan. Count me in, Koval said, rolling his eyes. I might as well die doing something interesting. Not just interesting, Darvo corrected, his grin sharp as a broken gear. Something stupidly daring with a side of reckless, Koval snorted. Fine. Where do we start? Thalassa pointed at the jumble of wires and equipment. We'll need to hijack the platform's mining equipment. Use it to broadcast a counter signal. How are we gonna pull that off without the whole thing exploding in our faces? Koval asked, skepticism etched across his features. Darvo leaned back, cracking his knuckles. Easy. We give it the good all slap and tickle. Coax the mining lasers to dance to our tune. I'm not sure if I'm more worried about the plan or your metaphors, Koval said, shaking his head. But fine, let's get to work, Thalassa said about coordinating their makeshift orchestra. The platform's mining gear was ancient and temperamental, like trying to play Beethoven on a ukulele missing 3 strings, but it was all they had. As the team scattered to their respective tasks, she couldn't help but feel a small surge of hope. This was insane, possibly suicidal, but at least it was something. Darvo busied himself with rerouting power, muttering to himself like a man trying to reason with an angry toaster. Koval, for his part, was elbow-deep in a control panel, looking like a man trying to defuse a bomb by instinct alone. Think this'll work? Thalassa asked, sidling up to Darvo. Work might be a strong word for it, Darvo replied, not looking up from his task, but it'll definitely do something. And isn't that the best we can hope for in this cosmic hellhole? True, Thalassa admitted, adjusting a few controls. But if we pull this off, I'm adding Alien DJ to my resume. I'll be your manager, Darvo quipped. Now let's see if we can get this rust bucket to hum the right tune. They worked like a team of mad scientists, each focused on their piece of the puzzle, hoping it would fit together before the whole platform decided to take an unscheduled trip to hell. The probe's signals were relentless, but Thalassa could see the potential for disruption. The key was timing. Hit them too soon and nothing would happen. Too late and they'd be cosmic dust. Got it, Koval shouted, pulling back with a look of triumph. The mining lasers are ready to sing, and the power's rerouted, Darvo added, grinning like a kid who just rigged his first firework. Okay, Thalassa said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if we can make this alien probe dance. They activated the counter signal, a low hum rising as the mining equipment fired up. The platform vibrated, a deep, resonant thrum that made the air feel alive with tension. Here goes nothing, Thalassa muttered, fingers flying over the console. The counter signal launched, a wave of energy that clashed with the probe's broadcast. The platform shuddered, the lights flickering as the two signals waged war. Come on, you stubborn piece of alien tech, Thalassa whispered, watching the readouts like a hawk. For a moment, nothing happened. The probe's signal was relentless, a juggernaut of alien intent. But then, like a needle in a scratched record, the counter signal found its groove. The probe's signal faltered just a beat, a stumble in the unending march of its energy. The platform held its breath, collectively willing the disruption to hold. We did it, Darvo shouted, the disbelief mingling with triumph. We actually did it, don't jinx it, Koval warned, but even he was grinning, the tension of the moment lifting like a weight. Thalassa laughed, the sound surprising her. Take that, you cosmic blender, the probe's signals wavered, the fluctuations growing erratic. It was working. They were actually disrupting the damned thing. Keep it steady, Thalassa ordered, her eyes darting between screens. We need to hold this as long as possible on it. Darvo replied, his hands moving with a practiced ease. They maintained the counter-signal, the platform thrumming with a power that felt almost alive. It was risky, but it was working. For the first time, they were on the offensive. "How long do you think we can hold this?" Koval asked, his voice tight with focus. "No idea," Thalassa answered truthfully. "But as long as it takes to make the probe back off." Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The probe's signals were chaotic now, no longer the unyielding force they'd been. It was like watching a bully get a taste of their own medicine. "Guess the probe didn't account for human stubbornness," Darvo said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "Or stupidity," Koval added with a wry grin. "Both are our finest traits," Thalassa said, adjusting the controls. "And damned if they won't save our skins." The platform shuddered again, but this time it was different. Not the ominous rumble of impending doom, but a defiant roar against an ancient threat. As the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, the probe's signals began to weaken, its energy faltering in the face of their improvised countermeasure. "Looks like we're winning," Darvo said, his voice a mix of disbelief and pride. "Don't celebrate too soon," Thalassa cautioned, though she couldn't help but smile. "We've still got to make sure it doesn't come back with an alien grudge." Just then, the probe's energy pattern shifted dramatically, almost as if it was gearing up for one last push. The platform groaned, the lights flickering ominously. "Brace yourselves," Thalassa shouted, her grip tightening on the console. The probe unleashed a final, desperate burst of energy, a last-ditch attempt to reassert its dominance. The platform trembled, the counter-signal wavering under the assault. "Stay with me, you hunk of junk," Koval urged, his fingers dancing over the controls. Darvo was already moving, rerouting power to bolster their defense. "Come on, just a little longer." The seconds felt like eons, the platform caught in a tug-of-war between survival and obliteration. But slowly, agonizingly, the probe's signals began to falter once more, its final gambit losing steam. We're doing it," Thalassa breathed, hardly daring to believe it. As the probe's energy pattern finally collapsed, a cheer went up from the crew. It was a ragged, exhausted sound, but it was theirs. A victory carved from the depths of desperation. "We did it," Darvo said, laughter in his voice. "We actually did it." "Damn right we did," Koval replied, a weary grin splitting his face. Thalassa allowed herself a moment of relief, a rare luxury in their line of work. They'd faced an ancient threat, and against all odds they'd come out on top. But as the celebrations began to quiet, Thalassa knew there was still work to be done. They dealt the probe a blow, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. "We're not out of the woods," she reminded them, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. "But at least we've bought ourselves some time. And maybe a shot at a real solution," Darvo added, his eyes still dancing with the thrill of their victory. "Yeah," Thalassa agreed, looking out at the stars. "And maybe, just maybe, we'll get to tell this story over a drink someday." As the crew set about reinforcing their defenses, Thalassa allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The platform groaned like an old man rising from a too-soft chair, the kind of sound that made you wonder if the whole thing might just finally give up the ghost. Thalassa wiped sweat from her brow, a grim smile tugging at her lips. "All right, team, let's make sure that alien thing doesn't come back for round 2. Darvo leaned against a console, his arms crossed, faced the picture of mocking disbelief. "I dunno, Thalassa. Maybe the probe just wanted to say hi, and we misread its social cues." "Yeah, sure. Maybe it wants to be pen pals," Thalassa shot back, eyes rolling. "Now, if we can just get this heap to keep humming, we might not end up as cosmic roadkill." Koval, still fussing with a panel that had all the reliability of a used car salesman's promise, grinned like a man who'd just found a forgotten beer in the back of the fridge. "Not that I'm complaining about not being vaporized, but what do we do if it comes back angrier and with friends?" Thalassa shrugged, the gesture as much a statement of cosmic acceptance as it was a dismissal. "Then we'll improvise. Probably with more swearing. Always a solid plan B, Darvo said, nodding his approval. Speaking of which, I need to recalibrate this mess before it decides to electrocute us for fun. The control room was a cacophony of beeps, whirs, and the occasional ominous clunk. The kind of soundscape that would make a symphony conductor weep for a lack of order. But it was their mess, and they were damned if they'd let it fall apart now. Thalassa checked the readouts, biting her lip. The probe was weakening, but it wasn't dead. They'd given it a bloody nose, sure, but it was still hanging around like an unwelcome relative at a holiday dinner. Okay, we need to keep jamming it, and maybe, just maybe, it'll decide we're more trouble than we're worth, Thalassa said, her tone a mix of determination and desperate hope. Darvo chuckled. Yeah, because nothing says go away like a bunch of humans with delusions of grandeur. Koval, popping up from behind his panel like a prairie dog, wiped grease from his hands. Well, at least if it decides to finish us off, we can say we went down being a real pain in its ass. Always the optimist, Koval, Thalassa said, smirking. Right, let's get back to it. The more unstable this thing is, the better our chances of survival. The trio resumed their dance with the platform's controls, a delicate ballet of button presses and lever pulls that felt more like a bar fight than anything approaching elegance. The platform's response was sluggish at best, like a ship's cook asked to pilot a fighter jet. But Thalassa had faith, or at least a reasonable facsimile of it, that they could coax it into one last heroic stand. Darvo, how's our power draw? Thalassa asked, her eyes glued to the terminal as it spat out error messages like a petulant child. We're running a little hot, but nothing that'll blow us to kingdom come just yet, Darvo replied, tweaking a few settings. And if it does, well, at least we won't have to worry about the probe anymore. Always a silver lining with you, Koval muttered, his focus divided between his own work and keeping an eye on the steadily destabilizing readouts. The probe's energy signals were still fluctuating, like a drunk trying to find the right key to their front door. Thalassa had to admire its tenacity, even if she was determined to make sure it ended up on the wrong side of the cosmic punchline. Keep it steady, guys, Thalassa urged, adjusting the counter signal. We're close to something, I can feel it. Hopefully not an aneurysm, Darvo quipped, though his hands were steady, his focus unwavering. Or a celestial wedgie, Koval added, his grin a flash of white amidst the grime on his face. As the minutes dragged into what felt like hours, the platform's rumblings settled into a kind of agreeable purr. A tenuous peace, sure, but better than being atomized. Thalassa glanced at the readouts again, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her features. The probe's signals were weaker, more erratic. It was starting to buckle under their assault. Looks like we're wearing it down, she announced, the words like a shot of adrenaline to the team. About time something went right for once, Darvo said, allowing himself a small smile. You know, I think I'm actually starting to like these odds, Koval said, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. The platform's systems held, a testament to human stubbornness if nothing else. Thalassa could almost feel the collective will of her crew, pushing them through this mess with grit and sheer bloody-mindedness. Then, without warning, the probe's signal shifted. It was subtle, a barely their change, but enough to send a shiver of unease through Thalassa's gut. Guys, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I think it's trying something new. Great, now it's evolving, Darvo muttered. Just what we need. An alien probe with a learning curve. Koval squinted at his readouts, frowning. What's it doing, trying to order a pizza? Worse, Thalassa replied, her fingers flying over the console. I think it's trying to override our systems. Darvo's expression darkened, his hands moving with renewed urgency. All right, time for plan oh crap. Redirect power, keep the counter signal steady, Thalassa instructed, her voice a razor edge of calm determination. We're not letting this thing get the better of us. The platform shuddered again, more violently this time as the probe dug in, testing their defenses with a relentless pressure. Hold on, you cantankerous beast, Koval whispered to the platform, as if it could hear him and choose to behave. The probe's signal lashed out, a wild, chaotic surge that rattled the control room. Lights flickered, alarms wailed, and for a moment it seemed like everything would fall apart. "Steady," Thalassa barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. Darvo was a blur of motion, his focus absolute, rerouting auxiliary power. "Let's see how it likes a taste of its own medicine. Remind me to never piss you off," Koval said, his hands a flurry across the control panel. The probe's aggression faltered, its attempt to wrest control slipping as their counter-signal held firm. Thalassa could feel the tide turning, a heady mix of relief and disbelief bubbling up inside her. "It's working," she shouted, a laugh escaping her despite herself. The terminal blared one last defiant warning before falling silent, the probe's signal finally collapsing under their combined assault. "We did it," Darvo said, his voice rich with triumph. Koval gave a whoop of victory, pumping a fist in the air. "Take that, you alien bastard," Thalassa leaned back, a weary smile stretching across her face. "Looks like we just might make it after all." The platform seemed to sigh in relief, the tension of the past hours ebbing away like a tide. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd stood firm against an ancient threat and lived to tell the tale. "All right, let's get everything back in order before it decides to rethink the whole surrender angle," Thalassa said, her tone light despite the gravity of their situation. "On it, boss," Darvo replied, already moving to bring systems back online. Koval clapped Thalassa on the back, his grin infectious. "You know, I could get used to this whole not dying thing, yeah, but don't make a habit of it," Thalassa shot back, though her eyes were bright with relief. "We've still got a lot of work to do." The control room settled into a more familiar rhythm, the kind born of routine and necessity. Repairs, recalibrations, and the occasional sarcastic comment to keep spirits buoyed. Outside, the stars shone cold and indifferent, unmoved by the struggles of those who inhabited their vast, unyielding expanse. But inside the platform, there was laughter, camaraderie, and a shared sense of accomplishment that transcended the impersonal nature of the cosmos. As the crew set about the necessary tasks, Thalassa allowed herself a moment to reflect. They'd faced down a menace from beyond the stars and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least intact. Not bad for a day's work, she mused aloud, a chuckle escaping her. "What's that?" Darvo asked, glancing over with a curious expression. "Just thinking we might actually get to clock out for once," Thalassa replied, her smile easy and genuine. "Yeah, and maybe even catch a nap," Koval added, his tone hopeful. Thalassa shook her head, amused. "You guys and your optimism. Fine, maybe we'll get a break. But let's not get too comfortable." The platform's systems hummed in agreement, a steady, reassuring presence that felt almost like a promise. A promise that even in the darkest reaches of space, humanity's stubborn will could light the way. For now, that was enough. Thalassa leaned against the console, feeling the weight of the universe lift ever so slightly from her shoulders. The terminal was blessedly silent, the probe's signal finally snuffed out like a bad joke that had run its course. For a second, just one, she let herself think they might actually be okay. "Koval, remind me why we signed up for this gig again," she asked, the words half a sigh, half a smirk. "Because we're masochists who enjoy the sweet caress of impending doom," he replied, still fiddling with a particularly stubborn control module. Darvo snorted, not looking up from his work. "Speak for yourselves. I'm in it for the free space meals and the chance to get a killer tan from the radiation." "Ah, yes. The perks," Thalassa said dryly, rolling her eyes. "Nothing like the prospect of glowing in the dark to spice up your dating profile." Koval straightened, cracking his knuckles and surveying the control room with something resembling satisfaction. "Well, at least we've got a story to tell, assuming we survive the next maintenance cycle." "That's a big assumption," Thalassa said. "Considering this hunk of metal is held together by duct tape and sheer bloody-mindedness." "Don't forget hope," Darvo added, flipping a switch with a flourish. Thalassa snorted. "Hope's overrated. Give me a good spanner any day." "You say that now, but wait until the space gremlins start demanding homage," Koval quipped. "Space gremlins," Darvo mused, tapping at his console. That would explain the screeching in the vents. Thalassa grinned despite herself. Even in the face of cosmic absurdity, at least they had each other. And sarcasm. Lots and lots of sarcasm. "All right, boys," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's get to fixing this rust bucket before it decides to take a nap and crush us while it dreams." As they set to work, each moving in the well-practiced rhythm of the desperate and the doomed, Thalassa took a moment to reflect. Not on the nature of space or the mysteries of the universe, but on the simple fact that somehow, against all odds, they'd made it through. "Never thought I'd say this, but I might actually miss this place when it finally goes belly up," Koval said, his tone a mix of nostalgia and resignation. "Yeah, a real paradise," Darvo muttered, tightening a bolt with the enthusiasm of a man condemned to eternal maintenance. Thalassa chuckled. "Well, it's not the Ritz, but it's got character. Character." "Is that what we're calling chronic instability these days?" Darvo asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sure, why not?" Thalassa said, her voice laced with amusement. "If we start calling disasters character-building opportunities, maybe we'll feel better about the constant threat of death." Koval laughed, a bright sound that echoed off the metal walls. "And here I thought we were just crazy." "That too," Thalassa agreed, waving her spanner like a scepter. "Now let's see if we can't keep this tub afloat for another day." As they worked, the control room settled into a familiar rhythm, the kind that came from long hours and too much caffeine. The repairs were tedious, sure, but there was a certain comfort in the routine. "So what's the plan when we finally get off this heap?" Darvo asked, his tone conversational. Thalassa paused, considering. "Find a nice, quiet planet, start a farm, grow some potatoes," Koval laughed. "Really, potatoes? Sure, why not?" Thalassa said, shrugging. "They're low maintenance, unlike this place." "Yeah, and they won't try to kill you every 5 minutes," Darvo added. "Exactly. Plus, they make excellent vodka." The thought of a simpler life, one free of alien probes and malfunctioning systems, was appealing. The universe was vast and uncaring, but maybe, just maybe, there was a corner of it somewhere that was a little less hostile. "Well, wherever we end up, I just hope it's got a decent view," Koval said, tightening a loose panel. "Preferably not of an impending supernova, or a black hole," Darvo chimed in. "Not really in the mood for an existential crisis today." Thalassa nodded, a wistful smile playing about her lips. "Yeah, I could go for a little less drama, maybe some peace and quiet." Despite the banter, there was a real sense of camaraderie in the air, the kind that only came from facing death and living to laugh about it. It was an oddly comforting thought. "Hey, Thalassa," Darvo said, his voice interrupting her musings. "You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't stopped that probe?" Thalassa considered, then shrugged. "We'd probably be a smear on the cosmic windshield by now." "But we're not," Koval said, a note of pride in his voice. "We made it. Against all odds, we did it." "Yeah, we did," Thalassa agreed, her voice softening. "And you know what? I think that says something about us. That we're too stubborn to die," Darvo suggested, grinning. "Or too stupid to know when to quit," Koval added, winking. Thalassa shook her head, a genuine smile lighting her features. "Maybe, but mostly I think it means we're survivors." And in this universe, that's saying a lot. As they finished their repairs and settled in for what passed as downtime, Thalassa let herself relax just a little. They'd faced the abyss and come out the other side, a little worse for wear but still standing. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "So, what's next?" Koval asked, stretching out with a groan. Thalassa thought for a moment, then grinned. "We keep doing what we do best. Survive, and maybe throw in a little chaos for good measure." "Sounds like a plan," Darvo said, nodding. "I could get used to this whole not dying thing." "Don't get too comfortable," Thalassa warned, though her eyes were twinkling. "The universe always has a way of keeping us on our toes." "True enough," Koval said, yawning. "But for now, I think we've earned a break." The control room was quiet, the hum of the systems a lullaby of sorts. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of peace, however fleeting. Thalassa leaned back in her chair, looking out at the stars. They were distant and cold, but somehow they didn't seem quite so uninviting anymore. "Hey, Thalassa," Darvo said, breaking the silence. "Think we'll ever get a chance to be heroes again?" Thalassa chuckled, shaking her head. "We're not heroes, Darvo. We're just a bunch of idiots who got lucky. Speak for yourself," Koval said, grinning. "I fully intend to write a book about this once we get back. How I survived an alien probe and lived to complain about it." "I'll buy the first copy," Darvo promised, his tone light. "Make sure it's a bestseller," Thalassa said, her voice teasing. "I need something to brag about when we finally retire." They laughed, the sound echoing in the metal confines of their temporary home. It was a good laugh, the kind that made the world or universe a little less daunting. "All right, enough sentimentality," Thalassa said, waving a hand. "Back to work, you slackers. We've got a platform to keep afloat." "Yes, boss," Koval said, mock saluting. "At your command, fearless leader," Darvo added, smirking. And so they got back to it, their banter a constant companion as they worked to keep their little piece of the universe from falling apart. Thalassa watched them, her crew, her family, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the faulty heating systems. They were a motley bunch, but they were hers, and together they could face whatever the cosmos threw their way. Because in the end, it wasn't about the technology or the odds or even the alien probes. It was about the people, the connections that made it all worth fighting for. As the lights flickered and the platform groaned in protest, Thalassa smiled. They'd survived another day in the vastness of space, and maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see another. "All right, team," she said, her voice full of determination. "Let's show the universe what we're made of." With a chorus of sarcastic cheers, they returned to their tasks, working together to keep the lights on and the nightmares at bay. And for that moment, at least, it was enough.